you have to focus on the positive and have stuff around you that's positive and tries to keep leading you in that positive direction. Doesn't mean you're not going to have challenges. It doesn't mean there's not going to be some negativity along the way. It doesn't mean, when you're fighting for those resources in schools, it's not going to be a battle and you're going to get frustrated, but look at the overall picture and focus on the positive and keep moving forward.
That's our guest, Jack Lavin. Jack has a storied business career, including being the chief of staff for the governor of Illinois and his present role as president of the Chicago Chamber of Commerce. He's the father of 3 children, including Emily, 24, who has Down syndrome. We'll hear Jack's inspiring story on this Dad to Dad podcast. Here's David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
And now let's listen in on this conversation between Jack Lavin and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Jack Lavin of Chicago, Illinois, who's the father of 3 and president and CEO of the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. Jack, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Glad to be here, David.
You and your wife, Kathy, have been married for 25 years and are the proud parents of Katie, 16, Michael, 22, and Emily, 24, who has Down syndrome. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Sure, David. I grew up in Elmhurst, Illinois, which is a west suburb of Chicago. I have 5 siblings, 1 sister, 4 brothers. My father was a family physician, and he was a physician at Elmhurst Hospital most of his career. My mom stayed at home and then got her bachelor's degree and worked as a nurse at the various psychiatric hospitals. So I went to York High School, and then when I graduated York High School, I went to University of Illinois. Went there for 4 years, and that was once again a great school. But anyway, so that's a little bit of background on where I grew up and a little bit of that.
Let's go backwards a little bit. You mentioned your dad was a family physician, a lot of stability. That's what I heard you and your 5 siblings growing up in. How would you describe your relationship with your dad?
My dad was a very hard worker. As I mentioned, he was a family physician. He had his own practice. He also worked as the company doctor a few days a week at International Harvester, now Navistar. There is nobody in my life that had more integrity than him. Every one of his children, including myself, have a tremendous work ethic. My wife might say workaholic, but I call it a great work ethic. He was a solid foundation rock for the family with great integrity, kind of a dry sense of humor, and just learned so much of how to be a good person. It's about your actions and how you help others. And that's, as a family physician, we had 2 phone lines growing up. One was the unlisted number, the personal. One was the number that people would call at all hours to talk to the doctor. I almost call it like a public service because he was like the real old-time family physician, $25 for a visit. I know my mom for a period of time worked as his nurse in the office, and they'd have arguments about how much he charged. But that's what he just believed, that's what he was to do. He was to help people be healthy and have a family physician. And if you couldn't pay, he would let you get your next time. And I think that's something I learned, all my siblings learned, and I think that's partly how we lived our life. I worked in government and public service for many years, and in some respects, passed up on maybe making more resources, more money as in a career by doing that. But I think in part it was growing up with that role model.
Yeah, well, I love to hear that. And you didn't come right out and say it, but almost said it. actions speak louder than words, right? No doubt he was a person who has a lot of wisdom to share as well, but it was the role model that he was to you and your siblings that stands out in your mind. So thanks again.
Now, he was also a very stoic person. He was an Irish stoic, that kind of thing. And that can be good and bad sometimes. I think we'll get to this later, but when we had our daughter, who was our first child, with Down syndrome, it was very emotional. And there was a lot of tears. In some respects, I was stoic like him. But then that life moment came along. And I didn't say much about my mom, but when we had our daughter, the support that they gave us was something that my wife and I will remember forever. And the support that they gave us, we couldn't have done it without that support. And that's how they were. They always thought about others. My dad was a family physician, and there were times when he had families that he was their physician. They had a child with a disability. And I remember after we had Emily, he was contemplating, sad, whatever, thinking about what the medical profession had told them to say to families. I think admittedly he said it a few times and he was having regret. So he was very much ahead of his time, but early in his career, the medical profession told doctors to say certain things to families who had children with disabilities.
Oh, yeah.
And he was regretful of that. And later in his career, it was better, but then even more so when he saw this granddaughter and he thought how backwards it was, what was told to some families, and how different it was. And the relationship that he built with my daughter, Emily, was a special relationship.
Yeah, well, it's a reminder that things have changed in the last generation or so. How not only doctors think about their patients, but about how society thinks about people with differences. Call it knock on the medical world is that they think of things from a deficit standpoint, right? They're looking to compare everybody to a model or an ideal standard. And if you don't sort of measure up, that's somehow less than. It's more than being politically correct. I think that it's just a more accurate way of communicating. And I appreciate you sharing that because it's an important insight that we have come a long way, but let's just admit that there's probably some additional distance to go.
And let's all be realistic. We all have deficits.
100%, yeah.
This was one thing. I think it was kind of a lesson, I would say, early on when we had Emily. Every child's going to be different, and they're each going to have their strengths and weaknesses.
Yep.
And Emily may have certain weaknesses and strengths, and Michael and Katie have different strengths and weaknesses too. And some are more obvious than others. But everybody's that way. So if you're a doctor, instead of talking about that obvious difference that's there, because everyone's going to have different issues growing up. And that's what makes everybody unique and everybody different and everybody good. And this is a quick story on my mom. One of my close friends, I didn't meet them till after college, after I moved to Chicago. But it turns out they were patients of my dad growing up. This friend of mine gives my dad credit for saving his mom's life. Your dad saved my mom's life. We love your dad. But I didn't know this until she called me when my mom died a month or so ago. She has a child with Down syndrome also that's a few years younger than Emily. So she had called us, Kathy and I, what do I do? What does this mean? And they had told her, you have a child with Down syndrome inside or whatever, and she probably won't live very long, blah, blah, blah. What do I do? But unbeknownst to me, till now, 20 years later, my mom called her up and just started talking to her about what a great gift Emily was to our family and, what a great gift you will have. And it was just another example, my parents just always thinking about others and giving to others. And how Emily had brought a great gift to our family, and she was telling them, you have a great gift. And by the way, her daughter was born, and now she's 20 years old, doing great. And whatever doctor told him it will only live a couple of years, maybe it was wrong again.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing those stories. They're a great testimony to your parents. And sorry again that your dad and more recently your mom passed away. So you mentioned that you went to University of Illinois, my recollection was you took a degree in finance. You went to work in consulting and then ended up going back to business school, from what I remember, University of Chicago.
Real quickly, I left college and went to work for Abbott Laboratories for 5 years, almost 5 years. Then went to grad school at University of Chicago. Part of that went to Seoul, South Korea, and lived there for a semester of study. Then I actually, after grad school, worked for Pat Quinn when he was state treasurer, so 4 years for the state in the state treasurer's office. Then I went into the restaurant business and was CFO for a company that did Papa John's Pizza and Panda Express. We went from 8 restaurants to about 140 while I was there. And then following that, I became director of the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. That was under Governor Blagojevich. I did that for 6.5 years. And then Pat Quinn became governor. And then I was chief operating officer for a couple of years and chief of staff for 2.5 years. And then I was consultant and then became president and CEO of the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce.
And what is your focus there at the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, our focus there, and we have over 1,000 members. We focus in 3 areas. One is kind of business connections, connecting businesses up with other businesses, basically to whether it's to sell their product, whether it's whatever they do civically, it's to make connections for people and businesses.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that brief recap. And I'd like to switch gears and talk about special needs on a personal level and then beyond. So I'm sort of curious to know, before Emily's diagnosis, did you or Kathy have much experience with the special needs community?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was in college, I had 2 roommates who had siblings at Misericordia. Kathy, who grew up in New Jersey and then later moved to Chicago, she graduated Boston College and went right into the field. She worked at a place out in New Jersey that served adults with disabilities. It was a residential and day program thing. So she, right from the get-go, started working in this field.
Would it be fair to just say in summary that you had a limited level of experience and Kathy had a much higher level of experience with the special needs community?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That would be very fair to say.
So thinking back to when Emily was born and the diagnosis was made, what was your first reaction?
Yeah, I mentioned the doctor's visit where we had some of that pre-testing. It was really, okay, this is a possibility, but, she's very active in utero, probably not, nothing. And then didn't really think about it. And then until she was born, and even though it took a few days to get kind of the official diagnosis, I think we had an idea that it was. And I think that my reaction was, I think, as I mentioned before, it was very emotional. There was a lot of tears. And then there was a lot of this thinking about, well, what does this mean? And how does this change what we're thinking of the future and our children? And that was really kind of early on. And then you have all the stories of all the people that sometimes don't know what to say to you when they see you. You should be happy you had your first child, but you have this diagnosis. And if I had $1 for everyone said make lemonade out of lemons, I'd be rich right now. And and then for us, it was our first child, so it was even the first child, just the unknown of that, and then you add this other unknown that you're wondering about.
Yeah, welcome to the world of parenting, and then welcome to the world of parenting a child with differences, right?
Right.
So lots of uncertainty. Was there any meaningful advice that you got early on that helped you and Kathy sort of put all these concerns or fears into perspective?
Yeah, David, there was this great piece of advice that we got. Emily was probably about 6 months old. There was a pediatric Down syndrome specialist at La Rabida, world-renowned. She doesn't live in Chicago anymore, but she did then. And we went there. She did a whole checkup of Emily, a round of tests and everything, and then gave us a lot of advice about the different checkups at different times in Emily's life. But then at the end of it, she said, But here's one piece of advice I want to give you, and this is the most important. It's more important than everything else I've said. She said, you and Kathy need to go out on a date night once a week. She said the rate of divorce among families who have children with disabilities is higher than the norm. And the most important thing for Emily's physical and mental well-being and growing up is that you two stay together. And she said, you need to have a date night once a week. And Kathy and I have had a date night every week since that day. Emily's 24 now. So for 23 and a half years, we've had a date night. And that really is so important because you are a family. You have a child with a disability. You may have other children. Everyone's important, including you individually and you as a married couple. And you need to be happy because if you're happy, your children are going to be happy. And so date night once a week. That's one of the most important pieces of advice that we had when Emily was young.
Well, thank you for sharing. And I think that would apply to all families.
Absolutely. The event that so comes back to me that made it okay and made it like, this is just life. I'll go back to my parents, and it was my mother. And it was a few days after Emily was born. They came to stay with us. It was very emotional. I think that particular night, I probably cried myself to sleep. But in the middle of the night, I woke up, and my mom was in the living room in the rocking chair, rocking Emily, and just telling the life story of Kathy and myself and how we met and how she was so lucky to have parents like us. And I think at that moment, and it was like, okay, we just had a daughter and there's a lot of love here. And there's a great story of us meeting and love. And my mom is just telling her the story, and this is her granddaughter. That is a moment that my wife and I both remember, because she then came out and saw that too. This is life, and you have a daughter, and my mom is just saying, I don't care about anything. It's my granddaughter, and we're going to love her. And she's just telling our story. That really helped us move forward.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. And it wasn't lost on me that was the first week, right, that Emily was there.
Right.
So you had a little bit of an advantage that you had that experience, if you will, from the very get-go, and not having to wait a year or years potentially to get that message or to witness, the love that your mom was showing Emily. And it's just very powerful. Thank you again for sharing.
And I'm not saying we didn't have tough times after that.
Oh, we'll get to that. Don't worry. What were some of the more important decisions that you and Kathy made as parents raising a child with differences?
We almost immediately got involved with other parents. We were both very proactive people, and Emily, before she was one, we had started a parent support group in Chicago, Kathy and I. Kathy became very involved with the National Association for Down Syndrome. They have a program for new parents. She ended up on the board, but during somewhere along that time, we kept saying, well, are there other parents in Chicago that we can talk to? And they didn't really have something in Chicago. And so we said, well, we're going to start something. Give us a list of the people. We'll just invite them over one night to talk. And we did. I can't remember how many. There was maybe 10 other parents or 10 other couples or something. But it was one of the most important things we ever did, because that cohort of parents and those kids, became close. We had a whole support group to talk about what should we do, where should we go, what schools are good, what organizations are good, what early intervention services are good. Oh, you're not getting that service, you should get that service. Or they're not saying you can get that, you can get that, and we're telling you we already got it, or whatever. All those things that you don't know And now you have this group that's all talking to each other and sharing information. In many respects, many of the things that we've been involved with over the years, or I've done in my professional career, came out of some knowledge that came out of this group and what we did.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. It sounds like that was the catalyst for a lot of the things that you've experienced, Kathy's experienced, Emily, so many other people have experienced, was the initiative you took early on to get this group of parents together, just really to open up the lines of communication and benefit from one another's experience and knowledge, and it's blossomed into so many different directions. So I'm wondering what impact Emily's situations had on Michael and Katie.
Well, it certainly made them who they are, and made them, Michael and Katie, young adults that have a more view of the world that's more accepting and tolerant. I think more empathetic of other people and what they're doing and how they're getting through life. I think all of that. I think the kind of young adults and adults that they've become have been impacted by Emily, and I think their view of the world is different and more tolerant and accepting of more people. Mm-hmm. But it all plays into looking at the world differently and accepting people for who they are and their differences, and that we all have differences, and that's what makes life interesting. No one's all the same. We're all different strengths.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It sounds like it's been mostly positives from what you had mentioned, as far as the impact that Emily's had on other people's lives.
Right.
And you'd said it's influenced some of the work that you've done, and it certainly influenced some of the things that Kathy's been involved in as well. So thinking beyond your own personal experience and thinking about the things that have transpired, I was impressed with the work that Kathy's been doing previously as the executive director at Able Play Lakotech for decades, and then more recently with the Gateway of Learning Day program. What is it that the Gateway of Learning Day program does? What's the mission? Who do they serve?
Sure. And by the way, interesting on Lakotech, it's no longer really around, but it was a toy library for kids with disabilities and how their development goes in different toys that help their development. And interestingly enough, Emily was a Lakotech baby and benefited from Lakotech. And then 15 years later, Kathy ran Lakotech, which is Able Play. Able Play and Lakotech are the same thing. So it's interesting how that worked out.
Okay.
But yeah, now Kathy runs Gateway to Learning. They serve day programming for adults with disabilities. Emily does go there now. She's just turned 24, so at age 22, you leave the school system, and she does go to Gateway to Learning. Everything they do there, they work with the clients to do it, whether it's making lunch for everybody, doing all that, but they also have a bakery. And so they make cookies and chocolates, and there's a local brewery, and they're taking their spent grains and making dog biscuits now. And so it's all job training in these, different areas. And they do all that at Gateway to Learning. And Kathy went in, they were doing a lot of things kind of old school, and Kathy's kind of brought them into the modern era.
That's fabulous. I also remember learning about, I don't know if it was directly or indirectly, about something called the Bell Center. What's the backstory on that?
Yeah, so the Bell Center was an organization for children with disabilities to be fully included in their educational setting. And so Bell Center was in St. Louis. It had been founded by a gentleman who was CEO of Monsanto, and then he moved to Chicago, and he wanted to bring Bell Center here, and Kathy and I found out about it. We went down to St. Louis, we talked to him, and then helped bring Bell Center up to Chicago. And this was all us thinking about, how is Emily going to be in school, and is she going to be fully included? Mm-hmm. But then it wasn't just about Emily, it was about all kids. And so Bell Center provided speech therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and consulting for teachers. So it's all the services a child would need to be fully included in a classroom and then consulting for the teachers who many of them want to be informed and want to have children with disabilities included, but don't necessarily know how or have methods to do it. And so that was what they did. We helped bring it here. Kathy was on the board there, eventually was chair of the board at Bell Center, Chicago. They had sibling shops, so Michael went there, and they had, kind of support groups for siblings.
Oh, well.
And actually, my sister worked there for a while too. So she worked in the disability field for a number of years too. So it was a great organization. It's now part of Aspire, which many people have heard of, but some of these smaller not-for-profits end up going to be part of larger. And so Aspire said, we need a whole part of our programming that deals with children and education. And so they took it over several years ago.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing. I remember you telling me some things that you were involved in as well. I think the Disability Works, which was part of the Department of Commerce, as well as a task force during the Daley administration as well.
Yeah. So the interesting thing and the great thing opportunity that I had is my personal and professional life was able to bring that together. And as the Disability Works program, when I ran the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity for the state, we did all the job training for the state. And Mayor Daley at that time had a task force about inclusion in the workforce, and he had this study done. And I had been involved in government a few years and knew that sometimes these studies are done and then they collect dust on a shelf. And I was walking out of the meeting. I had the job training funds, and I was walking out with Jerry Roper, who was then the president and CEO of the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. And I said, Jerry, if you and I don't do something about this, nothing's going to happen. That's just going to collect dust on a shelf. And so we started what was called Disability Works. And it got a lot of big companies in Chicago, big and small companies, involved in hiring people with disabilities and doing the job training that they might need and the coaching they might need to be included into the workforce and into the workplace. And so we did that, and it was wildly successful. The Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, gave us an award for that. It was a great way for me to do something that on a personal level was important to me, but on a professional level, it was the right thing to do. Jerry used to say, we're doing disability work so Emily can get a job when she gets to be an adult. So, but the Disability Works led to, when I was head of Department of Commerce, we developed a tourism guide for Chicago and the state of Illinois for what are disability-friendly places, especially for families to go to. I helped stop some of the cuts that the state wanted to do for autism and other areas that serve people with disabilities. So I had a great opportunity to be able to have my personal and professional life and goals come together and do some good, not just for my daughter, but for everybody. And in fact, at my going away party, when I left Chief of Staff and was there with Governor Quinn, I said that there's a lot of great things that we did, but the one that I'll remember the longest is where these two paths cross, the personal and the professional, and helping people with disabilities. And Governor Quinn was a huge supporter of all that all along the way.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it was very rewarding, not just from a professional standpoint, but like you were saying, from a personal standpoint, to have these passions that you have, work-wise and personally, be in such close alignment.
Right.
So I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering, what are some of the more important takeaways that come to mind when raising a child with a different ability?
Boy, that's a tough question. We've moved through life and been busy and always trying to do things to help the wider community, particularly the wider community and the disability field. So I guess it's just always just try to be positive and look at the positive side of things and try to do good. Because if you are helping people, people are going to help you back. If you're understanding people, they're going to be understanding to you. If you are thinking of others and helping others, it's going to come back to you twofold. And so the advice is not to turn inward, it's to turn outward. And try to find ways that you can get involved and help others, and be part of a wider group, because that wider group is going to help you deal with the challenges that are there and celebrate the opportunities and the wins and the good things. And it doesn't help to turn inward. You have to look out. I'm talked about a lot of positive things. It's not always positive. There's times when you'll have a pity party, you'll be mad, and you'll say, why us? And then if there's another challenge, you say, why we have this one challenge? Why are we getting the next challenge? All those things. And I'm not saying you're not going to have those. You are going to have those, but keep moving forward. You have to focus on the positive and have stuff around you that's positive and tries to keep leading you in that positive direction. Doesn't mean you're not going to have challenges. It doesn't mean there's not going to be some negativity along the way. It doesn't mean, when you're fighting for those resources in schools, it's not going to be a battle and you're going to get frustrated, but look at the overall picture and focus on the positive and keep moving forward.
Well stated. If I could try to paraphrase, look at the big picture, stay positive, and try to turn outward to the extent that you can, as opposed to inward. So why did you agree to become a mentor father as part of the...
Well, I think it's important, just like we started this parent support group. I think that you sometimes think I'm the only one going through this, or I don't know what to do, or if I think this thought, is that a negative thought? And I think it's important for people to understand, what others have gone through and help them as they're dealing with where they are currently, and try to see a long-term future that's very positive. Are people going to listen to every bit of advice? No, my kids don't listen to everything. So once in a while, I hear them talk and I know, they were listening to me. But I think it's important to hear what's happened so that you can think, how am I going to live my life? How am I going to raise my family? How am I going to find resources and other things to move forward? And you just don't know. I was lucky. I had Kathy, who had been in the field. I was lucky that we found this parent support group, because if we didn't have that, there's a lot of parents out there that just don't have or didn't find those resources, and they struggle. And maybe they find them eventually, maybe they get there eventually, but the sooner you can get there and the better off you are, your child is, and all your children will be in your families.
Well, thank you. We're thrilled to have you as part of the network. Let's give a special shout out to our mutual friend, Robert Blackwell of Killer Spin and EKI Digital, for helping connect us.
Yeah, Robert is one of my favorite people, and he is just a fantastic person. Turns out we grew up in the towns next to each other, but didn't know each other growing up. But he is a great guy, great dad, and a great person in the community.
Yeah, well, it's not lost on me that he was interview number 102 for our listeners who might want to go back and listen to Robert's interview, which wasn't that long ago. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, it's a great opportunity. I look forward to being a mentor. Hopefully what I've said can help some people. I think our next challenge is Emily moving out of the house, and I know that's going to be a big emotional moment too, but that's our next big challenge. But I appreciate you having me on.
If somebody wants to learn more about the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, Gateway to Learning, or to contact you, what would be the best way to go about doing that?
The best way is my email is jlavin@chicagolandchamber.org, jlavin@chicagolandchamber.org. You can also find it on our website, chicagolandchamber.org, and certainly contacting me there. And then if you want to contact Kathy about Gateway to Learning, and over the years, various people, we've been resources and support for a lot of people over the years, or if they have questions, we've been there to help them. So there may be a question for me, maybe a question for Kathy. Feel free to contact us.
Excellent. We'll be sure to include those in the show notes to make it easy for people to follow up. Jack, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Jack is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Please consider making a tax-deductible donation. I would really appreciate your support. Jack, thanks again.
Great. Thank you, David.
And thank you for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stcenturydads.org. That's 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like us on Facebook and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. The Dad to Dad podcast is produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks for listening.